Greetings and welcome back to Room 303. In our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, we turn now to a little poem, "Oh, living always, always dying." We're reminded of the way Whitman loves to stack words, the same word right next to each other, in this case the word always. This is poem number 12 of the 18 of Whispers of Heavenly Death, so we are now moving towards the end of this cluster. And I find this another one of those little poems that often isn't spoken very much about, but I find it remarkable because it's going to raise the question of whether Whitman believed in reincarnation or not. What happens after one dies? Does one reincarnate? Now you'll remember that in Song of Myself 49, Whitman said, "I've died myself 10,000 times before." And we're going to see some very similar kinds of observations being made here. Now our assumptions are that you've been with us at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, and that everything from those early inscription poems like Eidolons, which I think this poem is very much going to be for us a powerful echo of, all the way to a set of introductory comments for the cluster Whispers of Heavenly Death. And we just finished with Patient Spider. The placing of these poems in their order, I think, is significant, and we're going to try and point some of that out here. Now, we've been working with Norton's, and so we'll go back to Norton's to be told that this poem was number 27 of the Calamus group in Leaves of Grass 1860. This poem took its present title in 1867 and was placed in the Passage to India supplement in 1871 and 76, and in the Whispers cluster in Leaves of Grass 1881. The 1860 text began, "O love, O dying, always dying." The present reading of the first line in Leaves of Grass 1867. The manuscript that's called Barrett has the title Leaf as this poem. Now let's enjoy this little poem, and I think it's significant that Whitman put this poem right where he put this poem, following A Noiseless Patient Spider. Let's read it and enjoy it. And remember as well that in starting from Paumanok 19, you had these repetitions of this anaphoria with the word "oh." Here we're going to get 6 of them, along with 3 exclamation points. "Oh, living always, always dying. Oh, the burials of me, past and present, of me while I stride ahead, material, visible, imperious as ever. Oh, me, what I was for years, now dead. I lament not, I am content. Oh, to disengage myself from those corpses of me, which I turn and look at where I cast them, to pass on. Oh, living always, living, and leave the corpses behind." Now this is one of those little obscure poems of Leaves of Grass. This is why I argue that you have to read all the poems of Leaves of Grass, because I find this a fascinating little study, and his language here is quite remarkable. Notice the repetition of "oh, oh, oh." Why? Because I think in the face of death, this is one of those words that naturally captures our response. Oh. Right? It is that use of "alas" in T.S. Eliot's Hollow Men in those opening lines. Alas, oh. Notice it's living always, always dying. Now, I've commented a number of times on the significance of Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching, and the yin-yang symbol is representation of that notion, that there's this constant flowing, this movement in and out, that if life is about living, life is also about dying, and it is perpetual, always. And then notice the burials of, notice it's plural, burials of me, past and present. Now, we have looked at the 5 P's of Whitman, different types of Whitman's: poet, philosopher, pedagogue, as we've commented, politician, right? All these different, we've commented on these different Whitmans. I think Whitman would very much smile to hear us speak about him as not Whitman, but Whitmans. Here it's, notice, all of these different burials. Every time that Whitman sent a poem out into the world, obviously it was a type of birth, but also a type of death for him. Notice it's past and present. Oh, me, while I stride. He's back to this walking motif of Song of Myself 46, 47, to obviously Song of the Open Road. Ahead, material, visible. This word imperious takes us all the way back to In Cabin Ships at Sea at the very beginning of Leaves of Grass, as ever. In other words, there's constant evolution for Whitman. He's always about the movement out of the living into the dying, back to the living again. Go back to Song of Myself, passage 6, for the most obvious representation of this idea. Oh me, while I stride ahead, material, visible, imperious as ever. Oh me, what I was for years, now dead. And marry this set of lines to A Child Went Forth, for example, to see the brilliance of how Whitman tries to capture the entire human experience. Oh me, what I was for years, now dead, and then in parenthetics again, as he so often wont to use this, I lament not. I am content. Go back to Song of Myself 48. No array of terms can say how much I am at peace about God and about death. This idea of being content, it's such a balance for Whitman. On the one hand, he's always suggesting how unsettled he is, how measureless he is, and on the other hand, how content he is. Oh, now back to it. To disengage myself. Think about how this is somehow different from what he said in Noiseless Patient Spider, the previous poem, about connecting. And yet this idea of disengaging takes us back to this idea of standing isolated. Oh, to disengage myself from those corpses of me. In other words, to live beyond. This is the phoenix motif that we've talked about already with our study of Leaves of Grass, which I turn and look at, this idea of looking. And we've said this so many times. Whitman is the great looker. He's the great watcher. He's the poet that's always curious and wanting to know, right? Notice in Patient Spider, it was I marked, I looked. Look at where I cast them. In other words, it's like shuffling, like skin off of a snake. Many have commented on the power of that imagery in this poem. That it's like somehow living through these lives, that he lets the old go. He transcends and includes, to use the interval language, right? And where he casts them to pass on. This idea of a passage to India, of sailing on. And then again, now he's going to, in parenthetics, only now it's, oh, living, always living. Notice the absence of dying in this parenthetic. But then dying is leaving. Notice in a poem called Leaves of Grass. Guys, I've told you, I think Whitman's smiling, laughing all the way through these poems as he is challenging us to do the same. Notice, and leave the corpses behind. Now, no doubt, we can read this as one more poem like those that we read in Drum Taps. Getting or moving beyond. No doubt, no doubt, no doubt. But I think here, there's this challenge to us to think about what his view of reincarnation is. And it isn't just a certain notion of physical reincarnation, but rather a metaphysical reincarnation. This idea of constant resurrection, the constant growing through the living and the dying of prior lives, prior experiences, and the like. At 2a, what are we going to say about messages, themes here? Well, obviously, life is somehow a casting off. Isn't that what Linda Lohman says to Willie Lohman in Arthur Miller's classic Death of Salesmen? This idea that we always live from one life to the next life to the next life, iterations, picking up biographies, like the great biographies of Whitman will play this game. That you have the young Whitman, and then you have the middle-aged Whitman, and now we have the older Whitman being represented in these final, 150 poems, right, as he begins to age. At 2b, I love the anaphoria of this repetition of oh, oh, oh 6 times, balanced, obviously, with the exclamation points. Go back at 3a. Go back and look at, starting from Paumanok 19, to see how he plays that game there. Very similar. Finally, at 3b, what are your thoughts about the idea of reincarnation and the ways in which you right now are living through the lives you've already had, the experiences that you've already had? You'll remember that Thoreau himself said at the conclusion of Walt, and we talk about this in detail at learnstrong.net if you want to run it to ground. He says that I left the cabin at Walden for the same reason that I came. He says that perhaps I had more lives to live. It's a brilliant way to say it, and you'll remember that he said, if you've built castles, that's where they belong in the air. Now, it's time to put the foundations under them. And I think this is the game that Whitman is playing in this poem as well. Finding the appropriate foundations, and out of those foundations to then build new lives. It's my hope, and this is why we call it Talks with Walt, that these conversations with Whitman are doing the same for you. Thank you.